Hello there folks, and back again for another video. In this one we're going to be diving into the battle tome for the Idoneth Deepkin, as you can see here, and this is another one of my series of videos where I talk about 5 things-ish that I really like about a particular faction whilst giving you a flick through the battle tome. So the Idoneth Deepkin are one of the sort of new, I suppose you'd say, Aelf factions that were introduced into Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and this effectively leads me straight into the first of my likes about the Idoneth Deepkin, and that is about their history and sort of how they came to be. So the tragedy of the Synthai, as you can see there, is a very interesting one indeed, because it kind of follows a little bit of an experiment by Teclis, who is now, you know, or pretty much a god at this point, and leader of the Lumineth Realm Lords. When he was experimenting, the first of his creations was the Idoneth, who were dragged almost from the guts of Slaanesh and brought into the mortal realms itself. However, because of what they'd suffered at the hands of Slaanesh within its gullet, effectively, their gullet, this meant that they were not quite right. And this is where we get sort of a little bit of a mix between kind of Drukhari lore, sort of mixed in with a little bit of classic Eldar as well. So a little bit Dark Eldar, a little bit Eldar, a little bit vampiric at the same time as well. And the focus was very much on the fact that the Idoneth Deepkin had to effectively escape from Teclis's clutches, and so delve down deep into the waves to get away from his clutches. And that's where you get the sort of Atlantean Namor, Aquaman style Idoneth Deepkin within the world of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And I thought there was a particularly interesting passage here, which was the one that I marked, which is all about the Akarian lantern, which was able to pierce the heart of Ulgu and get deep, deep, deep into the shadows and the darkness of the mortal realms, crafted by Teclis himself and used to hunt down the remnants of the Idoneth Deepkin. However, it was stolen and thrown into the darkness of a trench somewhere in the mortal realms, the Sardanoi, so that it can be left and hopefully forgotten. What's quite interesting from that point then is that you get these really interesting mixes between the various levels of Idoneth society. You get those who are part of things like the Ashara and stuff like that, who are your slightly more illuminated members of the Idoneth Deepkin. And this then contrasts with things like the Namati, who are the thralls that you see as part of the Idoneth Deepkin army, who are sightless, eyeless, no hair on their heads, although that is the case with all of the Idoneth. And they are very much the sort of like the spawn, the vampiric spawn also element, I guess, that you kind of mix in here with the sort of vibes that you get from the Idoneth Deepkin. This then leads to sort of like some interesting background and sort of how the Idoneth Deepkin work. So you'll notice throughout a lot of here we've seen a fair reference to things like souls and stuff like that. That's because the Idoneth Deepkin launch raids, like soul raids, upon the peoples of the mortal realms, and they drag those souls down deep into the darkness to feed themselves and to keep them powerful, which, whilst them then being effectively part of the pantheon of order, this does make them slightly more on the sort of grey side of things. And so this is one of the things which I think is always quite nice when it looks into diving into the background of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. A lot of people see it as this kind of epic struggle between, you know, dark and light, that kind of very binary system with which the background has been set up. But in actual fact, it's a lot more grey. There's a lot more sort of like haziness around a variety of the different characters and the different factions that walk and exist within the the realms themselves. You see that kind of duality also within the Idoneth, and this is where I wanted to mark out and talk about the Eidolons of Manlath. So one of the things they go with is they tend to have a mixture between the sort of the sea and the storm in their sort of approach to things within the Idoneth Deepkin, and you'll see that later when we're looking at a few more of their sort of in-depth rules. The Eidolons themselves are effectively sort of aspects of Mathlan. Think a little bit sort of like the Avatar of Cain for the Eldar, if you wanted something of an analogue for them, or something that matches up to them. But with the case of the Eidolons of Mathlan, they are sort of brought out in the direst of circumstances, a little bit again like an avatar, and many, many souls are sort of encased into these beings, and they become what you see here manifested on the tabletop, or in this case the battlefield as well. And they are fiercely defended and sort of watched over by the rest of the Idoneth when they take to the battlefield, because if you were to lose one of the Eidolons and their spirit on the battlefield, then you would end up losing a fair whack of your sort of purpose, I suppose you'd say. If you've read the Gotrek novels of the last few whiles, there is one where they go up against the Idoneth Deepkin, and there's a really interesting look there at the background of the Idoneth, how they do their soul raids, where they're seen as something of like that grey morality, within the world of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, and sort of how that all comes together. There's some really interesting stuff in there about the creation of something like the Eidolons, sort of how they're formed. You learn a bit more about the backstory of them. It's very interesting, I think, looking at the elves as a whole within Warhammer Age of Sigmar, because you have the Idoneth Deepkin, you have the Daughters of Cain, you have the Sylvaneth, and then of course you have the Lumineth Realm Lords. And amongst them, all of them are very much that kind of elemental force, be that something like light, the wilds, the water, or just like sheer excess and blood, I guess. And they're very much driven by that. And that all of the factions, even the Lumineth Realm Lords, I would say, are very much on the sort of grey side of the spectrum, because the Lumineth Realm Lords are very sort of, if you've read some of the fluff, I guess, for them, kind of a little bit lawful stupid, if you were to take that as an analogy, where they will sort of like cleanse everything regardless of the cost that might bring to a particular region. There's some really interesting stuff in one of the Kado Ezekiel novels, where he comes up against the Lumineth Realm Lords, and there's a really fascinating thing where he's trying to bargain with them, but they just won't see past the fact that he's one of the Soul Blighted. And sort of that's a really interesting thing there, because you have this thing of them being like these paragons of virtue, these paladins, these elven warriors walking around with massive hammers, gleaming white and gold armor, and yet they're not all they're cracked up to be. One of the other things I really like about them, the third thing I suppose you say, is the stuff about their faction rules. And even though I think that for the majority of things, I don't necessarily think that a lot of stats within Warhammer Age of Sigmar are necessarily thematically well fleshed out. I know it's been something that's been pointed at them before, that they're sometimes they can be sort of like, oh, that's really cool, that's really thematic, and then the majority of the time it's like, I guess they've tried to do something here. But I genuinely think that they do put a lot of effort into things like their faction rules and stuff for all the different armies for Warhammer Age of Sigmar. And the Idoneth Deepkin have this one here, which is the Tides mechanic. So this is where during your turn, once per battle round during your hero phase, you can begin the tides, and you can either start with Tides of the Sea, or you can start with Tides of the Storm, and you can go through and bring the tides further and further up as you go through the battle round. But you can also, if you want to, you could start in Tides of the Storm, you could then let that wane, and you could start in Tides of the Sea. But if you do, you must go back to the first one if you want to continue to do that, which is quite cool. But as it sort of builds, it kind of shows the idea of like this massive wave almost building. And because it happens every one of your turns during your hero phase, you're essentially getting this build up as you go through of slightly more powerful abilities that sort of enhance your army as you go through. The storm elements are very much based around the idea of doing a lot more damage and that kind of thing, of being more brutal. And then with the sea side, you have a little bit more of like a sort of like sneaky element to it, a little bit more of a maneuvering side of things as there, which I think is quite cool. Although of course you've got things like Strike First, at the end there with Sea's Embrace, and then Storm's Wrath is crit mortals. So you've got to really sort of weigh up which way you want to go down with those. And because you're only getting, I think it's like 4 battle rounds with Warhammer Age of Sigmar, you'll have to let me know. You've got some play there and a little bit of give. But it's quite nice seeing how that all comes together, which is quite cool. It's been a long time since I've actually played a game of Warhammer Age of Sigmar, so you'll have to correct me in the comments if I manage to get that one wrong. But yes, lots of interesting stuff here when it comes to all of their different additions. I know we had some new characters that were added into the mix, which were these icons. So you've got an icon of the storm and an icon of the sea. So that's very much sort of going down that route of the 2 different tide elements that we've just seen there, which is quite cool. But all of the stuff is in there as well, including things like the Aechelian Leviathan and stuff like that. The Allopexes for those people who want their sharks swimming through the Aether Sea. Oh yes, I should point out, even though the Idoneth Deepkin are very much a sort of watery based faction, they can bring with them an etheric magical sea up onto the land, and they use that to navigate the mortal realms and bring their terror and their soul reaping to the peoples of the mortal realms, which is quite cool. And this is very much typified, I think, when we get to things like the Spearhead army for the Idoneth Deepkin, and I thought this was a particularly nice one as well, because it kind of gives you everything that you'd want, a sort of like iconic elements. You get the Morsar Guard, you get the Ishlayan Guard, you get the Namarti Reavers, and you get the Aechelian King there. So you get a little bit of the Namarti in there, which is really interesting for those people who want to paint in that sense and sort of play around with all the different flesh tones when it comes to the Idoneth. You get things like the Ishlayan and the Morsar Guard there, so you get to paint some interesting stuff when it comes to the scales of the fishy beasts that they have. And then the Aechelian King is a really nice mixture of the 2 of those. So this also feels like an army that would do really, really nicely with metallic, with a wash over the top of it for getting their armor right. And then a lot of things like contrast and stuff for all the different beasties. You should be able to paint that up really, really quickly and really nicely, which is quite cool. And this actually brings me, funnily enough, over to this battle-ready army thing that they've got here. So this is a really interesting way, a thing that they've done actually for all of the different battletomes for Warhammer Age of Sigmar on the new edition, is that they've put in this kind of way for you to quickly and easily get an army ready for the tabletop without too much hassle, which I think is quite cool. So you basically just get the required paints, follow the steps for all the different elements of it, bish bash bosh, you've pretty much got it ready to go, which I think is quite nice. So a nice little bit of a tool tip there, which is always nice to see, getting some of the hobby elements in there, which is quite cool. And then this is where it leads me to the actual rules and things for the Spearhead. It's a very quick Spearhead, as you might imagine, with all the different characters in it. And you've got a sort of an element of the sort of like tides in there, but that's kind of left out for them, sort of like all based around the idea of it being like a royal guard almost. So you have some of the bits and pieces in there that you might expect that then pop up later, but a lot of their sort of core rules are based around defending the Aechelian King in the middle, which is quite nice, as you can see. So yes, lots of things like being able to strike on the move, the biovoltaic blasts, the biovoltaic barriers, so you've got the defensive versus the offensive. So again, the Spearhead is a really nice way for you to kind of build things up and sort of carry it through. This then leads me to the last thing that I quite liked about this particular battletome, and that was this particular Army of Renown. It tends to be and always be an Army of Renown that sort of makes the final bit of these roundup videos cool to dive into, and this one's is the Wardens of the Corellium. So this is a specific one based around the Eidolons of Manlath, which can then be obviously the aspect of the sea or the aspect of the storm. You must have one of those included as part of your army. Then it's any Isharan, any Narmati, and any Arkelian infantry. And then you get a new set of battle traits, which is quite cool. So this is very much based around the Eidolons appearing on the battlefield. which because they're based around the idea of them being the Corellium Eidolons, and essentially they wait in the depths before they're ready to be called forth, and then as you go through, you can call forth the tsunami. You can use this to pick up yes, so you can use this ability if you have 3 or more Corellium spirit points that you build up over the course of the game. Set up a target anywhere on the battlefield, then inflict D3 mortal damage on each enemy unit in combat with it, which is really cool. So as it bursts forth, you have stuff here like the Spirit of the Corellium, which is a thing that passively generates each turn. So each turn you gain up to 1 Corellium spirit point. You gain 1 Corellium spirit point the first time one of the other things occurs. So an unmodified cast of 8 with the Isharan Wizard. An enemy unit is destroyed within 12 of an Isharan, or a friendly unit is destroyed within 12 of an Isharan unit. So it's all about those Isharans kind of building up those Corellium spirit points to then unleash the terrifying Eidolon of Manlath at the end. And then here we see the Wrath of Manlath at the end. Pick a friendly Corellium Eidolon unit that has not used any rampage abilities this turn to use this effect. That unit can use 2 fight abilities this phase, where it does that thing where it's the strike first and then strike last. The unit using this ability cannot use other rampage abilities the rest of the turn, but it allows the Eidolons to absolutely smash through ranks of the enemy, which I think is really cool. You get a new set of spell lore stuff there as well, which is really cool. One targeting things like the Narmati. You have another one which is each model in this unit can move up to D6 inches. That move cannot pass through or end within the combat range of an enemy unit as they slip through. And then summon Incarnate of the Deep. If there's not a friendly Incarnate of the Deep on the battlefield, pick a friendly Corellium Wizard to cast a spell, then making a cast roll of 2d6, and then you get to set up an Incarnate of the Deep wholly within 12. So it's a great way for you to manifest things onto the tabletop. And then you have a couple of just 1 artifact and 1 heroic trait, but that's all very much focused around the idea of the Eidolons anyway, which is really cool. So yes, some interesting stuff there that kind of builds up that idea of them a little bit being a little bit more like Bael'tan, I suppose, from Warhammer 40,000. Again, that sort of Avatar of Cain, Court of the Young King style vibe, where you're all sort of fueling the Eidolon as it gets ready to charge into the battlefield, and then bring it out to wreck face and take names, which is really awesome. And a good reason for you to buy one of the centerpiece models for your particular army of renown. So yeah, some fun stuff in there for the Idoneth Deepkin. It's not necessarily an army that I will ever end up collecting, but I love learning a little bit more about their fluff and their rules, and sort of how they've fitted into the mortal realms. As always, this is a very nice battle tome full of lovely photography, plenty of lore, all sorts of interesting stuff about the various characters, the named characters and such that are leading the Idoneth Deepkin. So if you're looking for something a little bit different when it comes to your elves, maybe the Idoneth are the way to go. If you can sort of grok the idea of controlling the tides, then this might be one that you dive into and snap up to add to your collection. But yeah, blind, soul-reaving elves, kicking ass and taking names. That is the Idoneth Deepkin for you from Warhammer Age of Sigmar. As always, like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff. Let me know what you think is awesome about the Idoneth Deepkin. And yeah, get stuck into those comments down below, because I love hearing what you folks have to say. And I always enjoy the conversations that come out of it as well. I'll be back very, very soon to talk through things like the Caradron Overlords and the Blades of Khorne. The Blades of Khorne themselves, or one of those factions that I am particularly interested in, because I have a fairly sizable Khorne army as it is, so they might be getting an outing soon. But yes, if you're interested in the Idoneth Deepkin, let me know what you think in the comments down below, and I'll talk to you guys very, very soon in another video. Bye for now.